He was handsome, charming, intelligent, a law student with a promising future. Women found him attractive and trustworthy. That's exactly what made him so dangerous. Between 1974 and 1978, Ted Bundy murdered at least 30 young women across 5 states, though the real number could be much higher. Some estimates put it over 100. He would approach victims pretending to be injured, asking for help. Once they were alone, he would attack, bludgeon, rape, and murder them. He would return to the bodies days or weeks later to perform sex acts on the corpses. He escaped from custody twice. He represented himself in court, turning his trial into a media circus. And on January 24, 1989, he was executed in Florida's electric chair, while crowds outside cheered. This is Ted Bundy, America's most infamous serial killer and the charming psychopath who changed how we understand evil. Welcome back, everyone. Ted Bundy's name has become synonymous with serial murder. His face is recognized worldwide. Documentaries, movies, and books have been made about him for decades. But what made him so terrifying wasn't just the brutality of his crimes. It was that he didn't look or act like a monster. He was the guy next door, the helpful stranger, the educated professional, and that's what made him the most dangerous predator of his generation. Let's break down his crimes, his psychology, and why his case still haunts us today. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His early life was complicated and traumatic. He was born to an unwed mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, and for years he believed his grandparents were his parents and that his mother was his older sister. When he eventually learned the truth, it devastated him. His biological father's identity remains uncertain to this day. In 1951, his mother married Johnny Bundy, who adopted Ted and gave him his name. By all accounts, Ted was a shy, awkward child who struggled to fit in. But something dark was developing beneath the surface. As a teenager, Bundy became a peeping Tom, peering into women's windows. He started shoplifting and stealing. He showed early signs of the manipulative, antisocial behavior that would define his adult life. Yet he was also intelligent and ambitious. He attended the University of Washington studying psychology. He worked at a suicide prevention hotline. He volunteered for political campaigns. He was even commended by Seattle police for chasing down a purse snatcher. To the outside world, Ted Bundy seemed like a model citizen. His killing spree began in earnest in 1974. On January 4, 1974, Bundy broke into the basement apartment of 18-year-old Joni Lenz in Seattle and bludgeoned her with a metal rod from her bed frame. She survived, but suffered permanent brain damage. A month later, on February 1st, 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy vanished from her basement apartment. Her bed was covered in blood, but her body wasn't found until a year later. Throughout 1974, young women started disappearing across Washington and Oregon. Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, Georgian Hawkins, all in their late teens or early 20s, all attractive with long, dark hair parted in the middle. Bundy had a type. Witnesses at Lake Sammamish State Park on July 14, 1974, reported seeing a handsome young man with his arm in a sling asking women for help loading a sailboat onto his car. He introduced himself as Ted. That day, Janice Ott and Denise Naslund both disappeared. Their remains were found together months later in nearby woods. This was Bundy's signature tactic: fake an injury, appear helpless, exploit women's kindness, then attack when they were vulnerable and alone. By late 1974, Bundy had moved to Utah to attend law school. The murders followed him. Women started disappearing in Utah and Colorado. In August 1975, Bundy was pulled over by a Utah Highway Patrol officer for a traffic violation. When the officer looked in Bundy's car, he found a ski mask, rope, handcuffs, and an ice pick. Bundy was arrested. A search of his apartment revealed maps of Colorado ski resorts where women had vanished. He became a suspect in multiple kidnappings and murders. In 1976, Bundy was convicted of kidnapping Carol Durant, a woman who had escaped his attempted abduction. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But while awaiting trial for the murder of Corinne Campbell in Colorado, Bundy did something audacious. In June 1977, while representing himself in court, he was allowed to use the law library. During a break, he jumped from a second-story window and escaped. He was recaptured 8 days later. 6 months later, in December 1977, Bundy escaped again. This time, he sawed through a hole in the ceiling of his jail cell, crawled through the ductwork, and dropped down into the jailer's apartment. He simply walked out the front door. Authorities didn't notice he was gone for 15 hours. Bundy fled to Florida, where his final and most brutal killing spree would occur. On January 15, 1978, just weeks after his escape, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee. In less than 15 minutes, he attacked 4 women as they slept. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy were murdered, bludgeoned and strangled in their beds. Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler were severely injured but survived. One of the survivors had bite marks on her body, forensic evidence that would later be crucial in convicting Bundy. 3 weeks later, on February 9, 1978, Bundy committed his final known murder. He abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her middle school in Lake City, Florida. Her body was found 8 weeks later in an abandoned pig shed. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. This was Bundy's youngest known victim, and the brutality of her murder sealed his fate. Bundy was arrested on February 15, 1978, after a traffic stop in Pensacola. The officer noticed the car was stolen. When Bundy tried to flee, he was tackled and arrested. This time, there would be no escape. Bundy's trials became media spectacles. He represented himself, cross-examining witnesses, arguing legal motions, playing to the cameras. He was articulate, confident, even charming in court. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bite mark analysis matched his teeth to the wounds on Lisa Levy. Witnesses placed him at the sorority house and near Kimberly Leach's school. He was convicted and sentenced to death 3 times. For the next decade, Bundy sat on death row, granting interviews, writing letters, and confessing to murders to delay his execution. In his final interview before his execution, he blamed pornography for turning him into a killer, a claim most experts dismissed as a last-ditch manipulation. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair. Outside the prison, crowds gathered with signs reading, "Burn, Bundy, burn," and "Tuesday is Friday." When his death was announced, people cheered. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders before his execution, but investigators believe the real number is much higher. Some estimates put his victim count over 100. He targeted young women, usually college-aged, with long, dark hair parted in the middle, a look that resembled his first serious girlfriend, who had broken up with him and shattered his ego. His murders weren't just about killing. They were about control, domination, and sexual gratification. He would return to dump sites repeatedly to perform sex acts on decomposing bodies. He decapitated at least a dozen victims and kept their heads as trophies. What made Bundy so terrifying was his normalcy. He didn't fit the profile of a serial killer. He was educated, well-spoken, attractive. He worked with police on other cases. He even helped draft Washington State's rape prevention legislation. He was the last person anyone would suspect. And that's exactly what allowed him to kill so many for so long. He was the wolf in sheep's clothing, and he exploited society's assumption that monsters look monstrous. Bundy's case changed how law enforcement investigates serial killers. His crimes helped establish the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. His interviews with investigators provided insight into the psychology of serial murderers, and his trial was one of the first to use forensic odontology bite mark evidence to secure a conviction. But perhaps his most lasting impact is cultural. Ted Bundy showed the world that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it asks for help, sometimes it looks like the boy next door. So what made Ted Bundy into a monster? Childhood trauma, psychological damage, pornography, as he claimed? Or was he simply born without empathy, a psychopath who learned to mimic human emotion? We'll never truly know. What we do know is that at least 30 women, likely many more, lost their lives because of him. And their families live with that loss every day. What do you think? Was Bundy born evil, or was he created by his circumstances? And should serial killers like him be given platforms to speak, or does that just feed their narcissism? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this deep dive into America's most infamous serial killer got to you, hit that like button, subscribe for more true crime, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.